They did not send her to clean. They sent her to die. The wolf kennels had not known mercy in decades. Men twice her size had gone in screaming. None had walked out. When the gates closed behind Calista Briar, the court leaned forward in anticipation. Chains rattled. 6 massive shadows rose. And the wolves lunged. Calista Briar had learned long ago how to be invisible. Invisible girls survived longer. Invisible girls did not anger noble stepmothers. Invisible girls did not dream of more. But invisibility could not save her the night Lady Briar smiled and said, "The kennels need cleaning." Everyone understood what that meant. The wolves were not pets. They were war beasts, bonded to the Lycan bloodline. They obeyed only one voice, King Rhydian Thorncrest. And he was not known for mercy. As dusk swallowed the courtyard, Calista walked alone toward the iron gates. No one offered prayer. No one offered help. Above, nobles gathered on the balcony, waiting. The iron doors groaned shut behind her. The smell hit first, blood, fur, iron. Then the growl. Low. Trembling. Ancient. 6 enormous wolves stepped from the shadow, eyes burning like embers in a dying war. Calista did not scream. She did not run. She knelt. And whispered, "It's all right." The first wolf leapt. Gasps erupted from the balcony. "Before we begin, let me ask you something. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Tell me your city, and what time it is where you are. Maybe it's late and the house is finally quiet. Maybe it's morning and you're getting ready for the day. Perhaps you've clicked on the play button because you require a narrative that comprehends longing without hastening it. Wherever you are, leave a comment. I will read every single one, and I love seeing how far this pack reaches." Calista Briar knew better than to look Lady Varys in the eye. She kept her gaze fixed on the polished marble floor of the drawing room, watching the hem of her stepmother's burgundy gown shift like a serpent coiling. The morning light filtering through stained glass windows painted the woman in shades of crimson and gold, colors Calista would never be allowed to wear. "You stole from me," Lady Varys said, her voice soft as silk and twice as deadly. Callista's fingers tightened against the rough fabric of her dress. "I didn't. My mother's pearl brooch. Gone from my vanity this morning." The lie slid from Lady Varys's tongue with practiced ease. "You were the only servant in my chambers yesterday." There was no brooch. There never had been. But denials were useless. Calista had learned that lesson years ago, when she'd first been brought to this estate as an orphan child. Lady Varys had been kind then, for exactly 3 days. Long enough to marry Callista's dying father. Long enough to inherit everything. Long enough to ensure no one would question what became of his daughter afterward. "I understand punishment is necessary, my lady," Calista said quietly. She'd learned that too, to make herself smaller, quieter, less. Lady Varys smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Indeed. The Lycan King's kennels require cleaning. You'll attend to them at dusk." The words landed like a blade between Callista's ribs. The kennels. Everyone knew what that meant. Servants whispered about them in the corridors. 6 massive werewolves, bonded to King Rhydian Thorncrest's bloodline, vicious as the winter storms that raged through the northern mountains. Men twice Callista's size had been sent to tend them. None had returned whole. Most hadn't returned at all. "As you wish, my lady." The words tasted like ash. Lady Varys dismissed her with a flick of jeweled fingers. Calista turned toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs like something caged and desperate. She was going to die tonight. Dusk arrived too quickly. Calista stood before the iron gates of the wolf kennels, her breath misting in the cooling air. Above her, on the palace balconies, nobles gathered like carrion birds. She could feel their stares, hungry and expectant. The gates loomed 15 feet high, black iron twisted into shapes that resembled thorns and teeth. Beyond them, shadows moved. A low growl rolled through the evening air, deep enough to vibrate in her chest. The guard beside her, a thick-necked man with pity in his eyes, cleared his throat. "You don't have to go in, girl. Could run. Might make it to the forest before anyone notices." Calista shook her head. Where would she run? She had no coin, no family, nowhere to belong. And Lady Varys would find her. She always did. Open the gate, she said softly. The guard hesitated, then pulled the lever. The gates groaned open, metal scraping against stone. The smell hit her first, blood, fur, earth, something ancient and feral. Then the darkness beyond resolved into shapes. 6 pairs of glowing eyes emerged from the shadows, burning like embers in a dying fire. The wolves. They were enormous. Far larger than any wolf had the right to be, each one the size of a warhorse, with fangs like daggers and coats ranging from midnight black to storm-cloud silver. Calista stepped through the gate. It slammed shut behind her with a sound like a coffin closing. The wolves circled her like a noose tightening. Calista stood frozen in the center of the kennel yard, her hands trembling at her sides. The ground beneath her feet was packed dirt, stained dark with things she didn't want to name. Chains hung from iron posts driven deep into the earth, each one thick enough to anchor a ship. The largest wolf moved first, a massive silver beast with eyes like molten amber. Scars crossed his muzzle, speaking of battles survived. His lips peeled back, revealing teeth that could crush bone. From the balconies above, someone laughed. The sound was sharp and cruel. Callista's knees buckled. She sank down, not in surrender exactly, but in the exhaustion of someone who had spent 19 years waiting for the world to be done with her. If this was how it ended, at least it would be quick. She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. To whom, she didn't know. Her father, perhaps. Or maybe to herself, for never being strong enough to fight back. The silver wolf lunged. Calista heard the noble's gasp, heard the rush of air and pause against earth. She braced for teeth, for pain, for the mercy of darkness. But it didn't come. Instead, something warm and heavy pressed against her shoulder. Not biting. Nudging. Callista's eyes flew open. The silver wolf stood before her, his massive head level with hers. His amber eyes were inches from her face, studying her with an intelligence that made her breath catch. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his head. And bowed. The sound of shifting paws rippled through the kennel. One by one, the other wolves approached. A lean golden female. A scarred black beast with one torn ear. 3 others, each deadly and magnificent. They formed a circle around Calista, and each one lowered their head in turn. Submission. The balconies above had gone silent. No laughter now. No whispers. Just stunned, suffocating quiet. Callista's hand moved without conscious thought. She reached out, trembling, and touched the silver wolf's head. His fur was coarse beneath her palm, warm with life. He didn't flinch. Didn't growl. He leaned into her touch. "What?" Her voice cracked. "What are you doing?" The wolf huffed softly, a sound almost like contentment. The golden female pressed closer, her nose nudging Callista's other hand. Above, a voice rang out. "Witchcraft. She's bewitched them." Another voice, sharp with fear. "Someone fetch the king." The king. Callista's heart stuttered. Rhydian Thorncrest. She'd never seen him. Servants like her weren't permitted in the throne room or at court functions. But she'd heard the stories. 3 centuries old. Ruthless in battle. Cold as the northern ice. A king who showed mercy to no one. If he thought she'd harmed his wolves. Footsteps echoed across stone. Heavy. Deliberate. The kind of footsteps that didn't hurry because nothing in this world could make them. The wolves' ears swiveled toward the sound. But they didn't move away from Calista. Instead, they pressed closer, forming a protective wall of fur and muscle around her. A figure emerged from the shadows beyond the gate. He was tall, taller than any man she'd ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to block out the dying light. Dark hair fell past his collar, and his eyes. His eyes were the color of a winter storm, pale gray and merciless. King Rhydian Thorncrest stopped just inside the gate. His gaze swept the kennel yard, taking in the wolves, the kneeling girl, the impossible scene before him. His expression didn't change. Not surprise. Not anger. Nothing. But Calista saw the moment he understood. Saw the flicker of something cross those storm-gray eyes, recognition, perhaps, or realization. The silver wolf lifted his head and looked at his king. Then, deliberately, he turned back to Calista and lay down at her feet. Rhydian's jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "What is your name?" Callista's mouth went dry. The king stood before her, waiting. His presence filled the kennel yard like a storm front, heavy and inescapable. She couldn't look away from those pale gray eyes, even though everything in her screamed to drop her gaze, to make herself small again. "Calista," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Calista Briar." Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, nothing about this man was soft, but a kind of focused intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Who sent you here?" The truth would sound like an accusation. But lying to a Lycan King seemed infinitely more dangerous than whatever Lady Varys could do to her now. "Lady Varys Briar, Your Majesty. My stepmother." She said the kennels needed cleaning. A muscle ticked in Rhydian's jaw. He took a step closer, and the wolves parted for him, but only barely, still maintaining their protective circle around her. "Storm," he said quietly, addressing the silver wolf. "Stand down." The wolf Storm didn't move. His amber eyes remained fixed on Calista, as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. Rhydian went very still. "Storm." "Nothing." The wolf didn't even flick an ear in acknowledgement. From the balconies, nervous whispers began to rise. Calista caught fragments, never disobeyed him before, bonded to his bloodline, impossible. Rhydian closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He was so close now that Calista could see the faint silver threading through his dark hair, could smell cedar and winter wind and something wild she had no name for. "Look at me," he said, and it wasn't a command so much as a request wrapped in iron. Calista lifted her eyes to his. The world tilted. It wasn't pain exactly. It was more like something inside her chest unlocking, a door she hadn't known existed swinging open. Her breath caught. Her heartbeat stuttered and then surged, suddenly too fast, too loud, thundering in her ears. She could feel him. Not physically, but deeper than that, a presence settling into her bones like it had always belonged there. Protective. Possessive. Ancient and patient and utterly, terrifyingly certain. Rhydian's eyes widened, just slightly. Enough to betray his shock. "No," he breathed. But it didn't sound like denial. It sounded like wonder. Calista didn't understand. Didn't understand the wolves or the feeling in her chest or why the king was looking at her like she'd just rearranged the stars. "Your Majesty?" A noble's voice called from above. "Should we remove the girl?" Rhydian turned toward the balconies. When he spoke, his voice carried across the courtyard with the force of a blade unsheathed. "No one touches her." Silence crashed down like a physical weight. Another voice, uncertain, "But the wolves." "Recognize her," Rhydian finished, his tone leaving no room for argument. "As they should." He looked back down at Calista. For a long moment, he simply studied her, taking in her threadbare dress, her tangled hair, the bruises on her wrists from years of rough treatment. Then he extended his hand. "Stand," he said quietly. "You kneel to no one. Not anymore." Calista stared at his outstretched hand like it might burn her. Hands had always meant pain. Lady Varys' slaps, the rough shoves from other servants, the casual cruelty of a world that had decided she was worthless. But Storm huffed softly beside her, nudging her shoulder with his nose. Encouraging. Slowly, carefully, Calista placed her hand in the king's. His fingers closed around hers, warm, solid, impossibly gentle. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength, steadying her when she swayed. That feeling in her chest blazed brighter, white-hot and overwhelming. Rhydian didn't let go of her hand. Instead, he turned to face the gathered nobles, his expression carved from stone and winter. "The wolves have chosen," he announced. "She is under my protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me." A beat of stunned silence. Then, barely audible even in the quiet, "She is mine." The chamber was larger than any room Calista had ever occupied. Larger, in fact, than the servants' quarters she'd shared with 4 other girls in Lady Varys's estate. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, draped in deep blue velvet that looked soft enough to drown in. Thick carpets covered the stone floor. A fire crackled in a marble hearth, filling the space with warmth. Calista stood just inside the doorway, afraid to move. Afraid to touch anything. Afraid this was some elaborate test she was already failing. "The wardrobe has been stocked," said the woman who'd escorted her here, an older servant with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. "His Majesty's orders. You're to rest. Eat. A bath will be drawn shortly." Calista nodded mutely. She didn't trust her voice. The woman's expression softened. "You're safe here, child. Whatever happened before, it's over now." Then she left, closing the door gently behind her. Calista stood alone in the silence. Safe. The word felt foreign, like something in a language she'd never learned to speak. Her legs gave out. She sank to the floor, her back against the door, and pressed her hands to her face. She didn't cry, she'd forgotten how years ago, but her whole body shook with something that might have been relief or terror or both. The wolves had bowed to her. The king had claimed her. "She is mine." Those words echoed in her skull, refusing to settle into sense. What did it mean? What did he want from her? The bond, that strange, overwhelming sensation when their eyes had met, still thrummed beneath her skin. She could feel him somewhere in the palace, a distant presence like a second heartbeat. Steady. Watchful. A knock at the door made her scramble to her feet. "Miss Briar." A different voice, younger. "I've brought dinner." Calista opened the door. A girl not much older than herself stood in the corridor, holding a silver tray laden with more food than Calista typically saw in a week. Roasted chicken. Fresh bread. Vegetables glistening with butter. A carafe of wine. Where should I put it?" the girl asked, hovering uncertainly. "I can take it," Calista said automatically, reaching for the tray. The girl pulled back, eyes wide. "Oh no, miss. You're not to lift a finger. King's orders." She bustled past Calista and set the tray on a low table near the fire. "Is there anything else you need? More blankets? Different pillows?" Calista shook her head, overwhelmed. The girl curtsied to her, and left. Calista stared at the food. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but suspicion held her frozen. This was too much. Too good. People didn't just give things without wanting something in return. But the smell of roasted chicken was overwhelming, and she hadn't eaten since yesterday's stale bread. Slowly, she approached the table and tore off a piece of bread. It was warm. Soft. Still steaming from the oven. The first bite nearly broke her. It tasted like safety, like care, like all the things she'd taught herself not to want. She ate mechanically at first, then faster, unable to stop herself. Only when the plate was half empty did she force herself to slow down, her stomach protesting the sudden abundance. A bath had been drawn in the adjoining room. She could see steam rising through the open doorway. But exhaustion pulled at her like a tide, and the bed looked impossibly inviting. Calista climbed onto the mattress, still wearing her threadbare dress, and pulled the velvet coverlet around herself. It smelled like lavender and cedar. Like the king. She should sleep on the floor. Beds like this weren't meant for girls like her. But her body had other ideas. The moment her head touched the pillow, darkness pulled her under. She woke to moonlight streaming through the windows and the certainty that she wasn't alone. Callista's eyes snapped open. A figure sat in the chair beside her bed, half hidden in shadow. Rhydian. He didn't move when she stirred, just watched her with those storm-gray eyes. In the dim light, he looked even more otherworldly, ancient and patient as stone. "You were dreaming," he said quietly. Crying out. Callista's hand flew to her face, finding tear tracks she didn't remember shedding. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb." "You didn't disturb me." His voice was low, careful. "I came to check on you." "How long have you been here?" "Long enough." Calista pushed herself upright, drawing the coverlet closer like armor. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but not from fear, from that strange pull in her chest, stronger now with him so close. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "In my chamber. It's not proper." Rhydian's mouth quirked, almost a smile. "I'm the king. I decide what's proper." Then the hint of amusement faded. "But you're right. I won't stay if you don't want me to." He started to rise. "Wait." The word escaped before she could stop it. Rhydian settled back into the chair, watching her with that unnerving patience. Waiting. Calista drew a shaky breath. "I don't understand any of this. The wolves, she touched her chest where that bond thrummed like a living thing. "This feeling. What's happening to me?" Rhydian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Have you heard of mate bonds?" The words sent ice down her spine. "Stories. Legends. Things that happen to Lycans. Not humans." "Rare," he agreed. "But not impossible. The bond doesn't care about bloodlines. It cares about," he paused, searching for words, "compatibility. Recognition. Two souls that fit." Calista stared at him. "You're saying I'm your mate?" The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. "Yes." The room spun. Calista pressed her hands against the mattress to steady herself. "That's not, I can't be. I'm nobody. Just a servant. Less than that." Something dangerous flickered in Rhydian's eyes. "Who told you that?" "Everyone." The word came out bitter. "Lady Varys. The other servants. The whole world, every day of my life. They were wrong." His voice had dropped to something almost like a growl. "The wolves knew it the moment you stepped into that kennel. They only bow to those worthy of their respect. They chose you before I even understood what was happening." Calista shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't want this. I didn't ask for." "I know." Rhydian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "Neither of us asked for this. But it exists whether we want it or not." "What does it mean?" Her voice cracked. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing you don't want to give." The intensity in his gaze was almost painful. "The bond doesn't force anything, Calista. It suggests. Pulls. But the choice is always yours." "Choice," she echoed hollowly. "I've never had that before." "You do now." He didn't move, but somehow his presence seemed to fill the room, steady and immovable as mountains. "You can reject the bond. Reject me. I'll still protect you. Still give you a place here, if you want it. You'll never go back to that woman." "And if I don't reject it?" The question slipped out before she could think better of it. Something shifted in Rhydian's expression. Hunger, carefully leashed. "Then you'll be mine. And I'll be yours. Completely. No half measures. No escape." The bond flared at his words, sending heat rushing through her veins. "I need time," Calista whispered. "I need to think." "You have it." Rhydian stood, moving with that predatory grace that marked him as other. "Take all the time you need. But know this," he paused at the door, looking back at her. "I've waited 3 centuries for you. I can wait longer." 3 centuries? Calista breathed. "Lycans live long lives. Most find their mates within decades. I'd begun to think mine didn't exist." His smile was sad, ancient. "Then you walked into my kennels expecting to die." He moved to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. Tomorrow, Lady Varys will likely demand your return. She'll claim you're her property, her ward. She'll make threats." Fear spiked through her. "What will you do?" Rhydian's eyes flashed silver in the moonlight. "Wolf, not human. Remind her that kings don't negotiate with women who send innocents to die." Then he was gone, the door clicking softly shut behind him. Calista sat in the darkness, her hand pressed to her chest where the bond still thrummed. 3 centuries. He'd waited 3 centuries, and she'd been waiting 19 years just to survive another day. Outside her window, a wolf howled. Storm, she thought. Somehow she knew it was him. She lay back down, pulling the coverlet close, and this time when sleep came, she didn't dream of cellars and cruelty. She dreamed of silver eyes and steady hands. Of belonging. Morning light woke her gently, a golden warmth that had nothing in common with the harsh dawn bells of Lady Varys' estate. Calista blinked awake slowly, disoriented by softness. The bed. The room. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd dreamed it all. The kennels, the wolves, the king with storm-grey eyes. Then the bond pulsed in her chest, steady as a second heartbeat, and she knew it was real. A knock at the door. The same older woman from yesterday entered, carrying a tray laden with breakfast. Behind her came two younger servants with fresh clothes draped over their arms, dresses in soft fabrics, nothing like the rough cotton Calista had worn her entire life. "Good morning, Miss Briar," the woman said warmly. "I'm Marin. I'll be attending to your needs while you're here." Calista sat up, pulling the coverlet around herself. "I can dress myself. I don't need." "Of course you can," Marin said gently. But His Majesty was quite clear. "You're to be cared for. Properly." The words sent an uncomfortable flutter through Callista's stomach. She wasn't used to being cared for. She was used to being useful, invisible, disposable. After breakfast, Marin continued, setting the tray down, "The wolves have been waiting by the garden entrance. Storm has been pacing since dawn." "Waiting for me?" "They won't leave. Won't eat. The handlers are beside themselves." Marin smiled. They've never seen anything like it. Guilt twisted in Callista's chest. The wolves were waiting for her. Because of her. She forced down enough breakfast to be polite, then let the servants help her into a dress of deep forest green. It fit perfectly, moving with her like water. The palace gardens were vast, sprawling across terraced levels that descended toward a dense forest. Calista stepped through the archway, her new dress whispering against stone, and stopped dead. All 6 wolves waited. Storm stood at the front, his silver coat gleaming in the sunlight. The moment he saw her, his tail began to wag, a strange, almost puppyish gesture from something so deadly. The golden female beside him whined softly, pawing at the ground. "Hello," Calista whispered, feeling foolish. They were wolves, not people. They couldn't understand her. Storm approached slowly, deliberately, giving her time to retreat if she wanted. When she didn't move, he pressed his massive head against her palm. The contact sent warmth flooding through her, the bond responding with something like recognition. The others came next, one by one. The golden female, Naira, somehow she knew. The scarred black wolf was Verek. Then Ash, Thorn, and Rhyme, their names sliding into her awareness like she'd always known them. "How am I doing this?" she asked aloud. "The bond." Calista spun. Rhydian stood in the archway, watching her with an expression she couldn't name. He wore simple clothing today, dark tunic and trousers, but authority clung to him like a cloak. "The wolves are bonded to my bloodline," he explained, moving closer. "They share what I feel. Sense what I sense." He paused. "You're my mate. They recognize you as theirs to protect." Storm moved between them, looking from Calista to Rhydian and back, as if checking that they were both real, both safe. "They wouldn't eat," Calista said quietly. "They were worried." Rhydian's mouth quirked. "I've never seen Storm defy a direct command before yesterday. Now he won't leave your side." "I don't understand why." "Because they see what I see." Rhydian's voice dropped lower, intimate despite the distance between them. "Strength. Worth. Everything the world tried to convince you that you weren't." The words landed like physical blows, too much, too kind. Calista looked away, her throat tight. "Lady Varys is here," Rhydian said, changing the subject with careful precision. "She's demanding an audience with me. Demanding your return." Fear lanced through her, sharp and familiar. The bond must have carried it to Rhydian because his expression hardened instantly, his eyes flashing silver. "She can't have you," he said flatly. "But you should be there. In the throne room. Let her see that you're not hers to command anymore." Callista's hands trembled. Face Lady Varys. Stand before the entire court. Everything in her screamed to hide, to run, to make herself small again. But Storm pressed against her leg, solid and warm. Nyra sat on her other side. The other wolves formed a loose circle around her, protective and certain. "You won't be alone," Rhydian said softly. "I promise you that." Calista drew a shaking breath. Then another. Then she lifted her chin and met his eyes. "When?" "Within the hour." She nodded once. "Then I'll be ready." The throne room was vast and cold, all stone pillars and vaulted ceilings that swallowed sound. Nobles lined both sides in their finest silks and jewels, watching with the hungry anticipation of people who lived for spectacle. Calista walked between Storm and Nyra, the other 4 wolves flanking them in formation. Every eye tracked her progress across the marble floor. She could feel their stares, hear the whispers that spread like wildfire. "The servant girl walks with his wolves. Impossible." At the far end of the hall, Rhydian sat on a throne of black stone, carved with wolves and thorns. He didn't move when Calista entered, but she felt his attention snap to her with the force of a lightning strike. The bond flared between them, steadying her trembling legs. And there, at the base of the throne steps, stood Lady Varys. She looked exactly as Calista remembered, beautiful in the way of predators, wearing burgundy silk and pearls. Her face was composed in an expression of dignified concern that would fool anyone who hadn't lived under her roof. When Lady Varys saw Calista, something flickered in her eyes. Surprise. Then calculation. "Calista." She pressed a hand to her chest, playing the role perfectly. "Thank the gods you're alive. When I heard about the Kennels, I feared the worst. Come, child. We'll return home immediately." Calista stopped 10 paces away. Storm growled low in his chest. "Lady Briar," Rhydian said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You sent her to the Kennels." "A misunderstanding, Your Majesty." Lady Varys turned back to him, her smile apologetic. "The girl stole from me. I meant only to frighten her, to teach her a lesson about consequences. I never imagined she would actually enter." "I didn't steal anything." The words left Callista's mouth before she could stop them. Her voice sounded too loud, too clear in the cavernous space. Lady Varys's smile tightened. "Calista, dear, you're confused. Traumatized by your ordeal. Let's discuss this at home." "There was no brooch," Calista continued, her hands clenched at her sides. "You sent me to die. You've wanted me dead since the day you married my father." Gasps rippled through the court. Lady Varys's mask slipped, just for a moment, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "How dare you," she hissed. "I took you in. Fed you. Gave you a roof over your head when you had nothing." "You used me as unpaid labor," Calista said, her voice shaking but steady. "You starved me. Beat me. Made me sleep in the cellar." "Lies." Lady Varys whirled toward Rhydian. "Your Majesty, the girl is hysterical. Delusional. She needs to come home where I can care for her properly." "Enough." The single word from Rhydian silenced the entire hall. He stood, and the movement was like a mountain shifting. Power rolled off him in waves, making the air itself feel heavy. "The wolves do not bow to liars," he said softly. "They do not protect the unworthy. They chose her. That tells me everything I need to know." He descended the steps, each footfall echoing like thunder. When he reached Calista, he didn't touch her, but he positioned himself beside her. "A united front. Calista Briar is under my protection," Rhydian announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "She will remain in the palace. Any claim you had to her is dissolved. Any authority you believed you possessed over her is ended." Lady Varys's composure cracked. "You can't do this. I have legal guardianship. Papers. The law. I am the law." Rhydian's eyes flashed silver. "And if you attempt to reclaim her, if you so much as speak her name beyond these walls, I will investigate exactly how your previous husband died. How convenient that he fell ill so quickly after marriage. How fortunate that his estate passed entirely to you." The color drained from Lady Varys's face. You wouldn't dare, she whispered. Try me. His voice was arctic. Leave my palace. Consider your position here at court forfeit. And pray I don't look too closely at your finances, your servants, he paused, convenient widowhood. For a long moment, Lady Varys simply stared. Then she turned that gaze on Calista, and it was pure venom. You'll regret this, she said quietly. When he tires of you. When you realize what you've given up. Storm lunged forward with a snarl that shook the rafters. Lady Varys stumbled backward, terror finally breaking through her mask. Storm, Rhydian said quietly. The wolf stopped but didn't retreat, placing himself between Calista and her stepmother. A living wall of teeth and fury. Go, Rhydian commanded. Before I change my mind about mercy. Lady Varys fled. She tried to maintain dignity, but by the time she reached the doors, she was nearly running. The court watched in stunned silence as she disappeared. Callista's legs gave out. Rhydian caught her before she hit the ground, his arms solid and warm around her. I have you, he murmured against her hair. I have you. Rhydian carried her from the throne room despite her protests. Calista was dimly aware of the court parting around them, of nobles bowing as the king passed with his mate cradled against his chest. The wolves followed in silent procession, their presence keeping curious onlookers at a respectful distance. I can walk, she managed, though her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. I know, Rhydian said quietly. But you don't have to. He didn't take her back to her chamber. Instead, he carried her to a private solar, a smaller room with windows overlooking the gardens. A fire burned low in the hearth. He set her gently on a cushioned seat, then stepped back, giving her space. The wolves settled around her feet like a living carpet. Storm rested his massive head on her knee, his amber eyes watchful. Calista stared at the fire, trying to process what had just happened. Lady Varys was gone. Truly gone. No more threats. No more fear of being dragged back to that estate, to that cellar, to that life. She should feel relieved. Victorious, even. Instead, she felt hollow. You're trembling, Rhydian observed. He hadn't moved from his position near the door, maintaining careful distance. I spoke back to her, Calista whispered. I've never done that before. Never stood up for myself. You were magnificent. The word landed strange and unfamiliar. Magnificent. Her. The girl who'd scrubbed floors and slept in cellars and believed she was nothing. I was terrified, she admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Rhydian moved closer, finally, and crouched beside her chair so their eyes were level. It's doing what needs to be done despite it. You stood before the entire court. Told your truth. Do you understand how rare that is? Calista shook her head. She felt like she might shatter, like everything inside her was too big for her body to contain. May I? Rhydian asked, gesturing to her hand. She nodded mutely. He took her hand in both of his, and the contact sent warmth flooding through her, the bond responding, soothing the jagged edges of her fear. You never have to see her again, he said softly. She has no power over you. Not anymore. What if you change your mind? The question burst out before she could stop it. What if you decide I'm not worth the trouble? What if? I won't. His voice was absolute, leaving no room for doubt. Calista, look at me. She met his storm-gray eyes. I've lived 3 centuries. I've seen kingdoms rise and fall. I've fought wars that lasted longer than most humans live. His thumbs traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. And in all that time, I've never felt what I feel when I look at you. Her breath caught. What do you feel? Like I finally understand why I was meant to live so long. He leaned closer, and she could see gold flecks in the gray of his eyes. I was waiting for you. The bond between them flared hot and bright, and Calista realized with sudden clarity that she could feel him too, his steady certainty, his fierce protectiveness, his carefully controlled desire. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to be someone's, she couldn't say the word. Mate. It was too big, too permanent. You don't have to know. We'll figure it out together. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent electricity racing up her arm. One day at a time. One moment at a time. Whatever you need. Storm huffed softly, as if in agreement. Nyra pressed closer, her golden head resting on Callista's other leg. They really do love you, Rhydian observed with a hint of amusement. I think Storm might love you more than he loves me. Despite everything, Calista found herself smiling. That can't be true. It is. He smiled back, and the expression transformed his face, making him look younger, less ancient. But I can't blame him. You walked into a kennel of death and showed them kindness. You spoke truth in a court full of lies. He paused, searching for words. You're extraordinary. Calista didn't feel extraordinary. She felt exhausted and overwhelmed and terrifyingly hopeful. But for the first time in 19 years, she also felt safe. Stay with me, she said impulsively. Just for a while. Rhydian's expression softened. As long as you want. They sat together by the fire, hands intertwined, while the wolves dozed at their feet. And slowly, gradually, Calista felt the hollow place inside her begin to fill with something warm and unfamiliar. Hope. 3 days passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. Calista woke each morning to sunlight and soft sheets, to breakfast trays laden with food she didn't have to earn. Marin helped her dress in clothes that fit, that weren't patched or threadbare. No one struck her. No one screamed at her. No one told her she was worthless. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop. The wolves became her constant companions. They followed her through the gardens, lay at her feet during meals, slept outside her chamber door at night. Storm, especially, refused to leave her side for more than a few minutes at a time. You've stolen my wolves, Rhydian said one afternoon, finding her in the library with all 6 beasts sprawled around her chair. Calista looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read. I didn't mean to. I'm not complaining. He settled into the chair across from her, and she noticed he moved carefully, maintaining distance. Always letting her set the pace. They're happier than I've ever seen them. Verek, the scarred black wolf, lifted his head and huffed as if in agreement. I still don't understand why they chose me, Calista admitted. I'm not special. Rhydian's expression darkened. She really did a number on you, didn't she? Calista looked away, heat creeping up her neck. I'm just being realistic. No. You're repeating lies you were told so often you started believing them. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The wolves don't lie, Calista. They can't. They sense worth, strength, goodness. They chose you because of who you are, not despite it. She wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly it hurt. The court talks, she said instead. I hear the whispers. They think she paused, searching for the right word. Unsuitable. Let them talk. Rhydian's voice held an edge of steel. Their opinions don't matter. They matter to me, Calista whispered. I don't know how to be what you need me to be. I don't know how to be the word still caught in her throat. How to be your mate. Rhydian stood and crossed to her, moving slowly enough that she could stop him if she wanted. He knelt beside her chair, bringing their eyes level, and took her hand. You don't have to be anything but yourself, he said quietly. I don't need a queen who knows every court protocol. I don't need someone who was raised in silk and jewels. I need, he paused, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I need you. Exactly as you are. The bond between them pulsed, warm and steady. Calista could feel his sincerity, could sense that he meant every word. What if I'm not enough? She asked, her voice breaking. What if you're more than I deserve? He countered softly. That startled a laugh from her, short and disbelieving. You're a king. You've lived for centuries. You could have anyone. I don't want anyone. His eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. I want you. The girl who showed kindness to wolves that were meant to kill her. The girl who stood in my throne room and spoke truth to power. The girl who survived 19 years of cruelty and somehow remained gentle. Tears pricked at Callista's eyes. She blinked them back, but one escaped, trailing down her cheek. Rhydian reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he brushed the tear away with his thumb, his touch impossibly gentle. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of all of this. Of the bond. Of feeling things I've never felt before." "That's all right." His hand lingered against her cheek, warm and steady. "We can be scared together." "You're scared?" The idea seemed impossible. He was a king. Ancient. Powerful. Terrified, he confessed. "I've waited 300 years for you. What if I fail you? What if I can't give you what you need? What if," his jaw tightened, "what if the damage she did runs too deep for me to help you heal?" Calista placed her free hand over his, still cupping her cheek. "You already are helping," she whispered. "Just by being here. By being patient. By," she swallowed hard, "by making me feel like I matter." "You do matter." His voice was fierce. "You matter more than anything." Storm chose that moment to push his head between them, huffing loudly as if to remind them he was still there. Naira whined in agreement. Despite the intensity of the moment, Calista laughed. "I think they're jealous." Rhydian smiled, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "They're not used to sharing my attention." "Our attention," Calista corrected softly. The word hung in the air between them. Our. A future. A partnership. Rhydian's eyes darkened with something that made her pulse quicken. "Our," he repeated, like a vow. That night, Calista couldn't sleep. She lay in her luxurious bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the afternoon in the library. The way Rhydian had looked at her. The warmth of his hand against her cheek. The word that had slipped from her lips, "our." The bond hummed in her chest, restless and alive. She could feel him somewhere in the palace, awake like her. The awareness was maddening and comforting in equal measure. Finally, she gave up on sleep and wrapped a robe around herself. The moment she opened her door, Storm lifted his massive head from where he'd been lying guard. The other wolves stirred as well, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. "I need air," she whispered to them. Storm stood, shaking out his silver coat, and the others followed suit. They formed their usual protective circle around her as she walked through the quiet corridors toward the gardens. The night air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers. A full moon hung heavy in the sky, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Calista walked until she reached a small clearing with a fountain at its center. She sat on the stone edge, trailing her fingers through the water, while the wolves settled around her. "I thought I might find you here." She didn't startle. Somehow, she'd known he would come. The bond had been pulling her toward him all evening, and him toward her. Rhydian emerged from the shadows, wearing simple sleep clothes, his dark hair loose around his shoulders. In the moonlight, he looked younger, almost mortal. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "I can feel your restlessness through the bond." He moved closer but maintained his careful distance. "It calls to me." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you." "Don't." He settled onto the fountain's edge beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Don't apologize for existing. For feeling. For taking up space." Calista looked down at her hands. "Old habits." "I know." His voice was gentle. "But you're allowed to want things. To need things. To ask for them. What if I don't know what I want? Then we figure it out together." He paused. "What are you thinking about right now?" "You," she admitted, heat flooding her cheeks. "This. Us. The bond. Everything that's happened in the past week. It feels like a dream. Like I'm going to wake up back in that cellar and none of this will be real." Rhydian reached out slowly and took her hand. "It's real. I'm real. This," he pressed her palm against his chest, over his heart. "What you feel. It's real." His heart beat steady and strong beneath her palm. The bond surged between them, hot and bright, and suddenly Calista couldn't remember why she'd been so afraid. "I want to accept it," she whispered. "The bond. I want to stop being afraid." Rhydian went very still. Calista. But I don't know how, she continued, her words tumbling over each other. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. How to be yours. You don't have to do anything. His free hand came up to cup her face, tilting it so she had to meet his eyes. The bond isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about choice. About saying yes. Yes, she breathed. The word hung in the moonlit air between them. Say it again, Rhydian said, his voice rough. So I know you mean it. Calista placed her other hand over his, still pressed against his chest. She could feel his heart racing now, matching the frantic beat of her own. I choose you, she said clearly. I choose this. I choose us. The bond exploded between them. It was like nothing Calista had ever felt, a rush of heat and light and emotion so overwhelming it should have been terrifying. But it wasn't. It felt like coming home. Like finding something she'd been missing her entire life without knowing it. She could feel Rhydian's fierce joy, his relief, his love. Yes, love, ancient and patient and absolutely certain. It poured into her through the bond, filling all the hollow places Lady Varys had carved into her soul. Calista, Rhydian said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. Kiss me, she whispered. Please. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. When his lips finally met hers, gentle and reverent, the bond flared so bright it stole her breath. Around them, the wolves began to howl. The sound echoed across the palace grounds, triumphant and wild. The pack celebrating their queen. When they finally broke apart, Rhydian rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. Mine, he said softly. Calista smiled, feeling powerful for the first time in her life. Yours. And you're mine. Always, he promised. For as long as I live. The palace woke to the news before dawn. The wolves had howled. The bond had locked. The king had claimed his mate. Calista felt the change immediately. The servants who brought her breakfast no longer looked at her with pity or curiosity, they looked at her with respect. When she walked through the corridors, nobles bowed. Not out of obligation, but acknowledgement. She was no longer the servant girl who'd survived the Kennels. She was the Lycan King's mate. They're staring, she whispered to Rhydian as they walked through the gardens that afternoon, his hand warm and solid around hers. Let them. His thumb traced circles on her palm. You're remarkable. Of course they stare. Storm trotted ahead of them, his silver coat gleaming in the sunlight. The other wolves flanked them in loose formation, relaxed but watchful. They'd been insufferably smug all morning, as if they'd orchestrated the whole thing. I need to tell you something, Rhydian said, his tone shifting to something more serious. Callista's stomach tightened. What? The marking ceremony. It's traditionally held under the full moon. He stopped walking, turning to face her. That's 3 days from now. Marking. She touched her neck unconsciously. It completes the bond. Makes it permanent, visible. His eyes searched hers. A bite here. He brushed his fingers along the curve where her neck met her shoulder, and heat flooded through her. It tells the world you're mine. And that I'm yours. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent warmth pooling low in her belly. Does it hurt? She asked. For a moment. Then, his eyes darkened. Then it's the opposite of pain. Callista's breath caught. 3 days. 3 days until she was bound to him completely, irrevocably. I want it, she said firmly. The ceremony. The mark. All of it. Rhydian's control visibly frayed. His hand tightened on hers, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. You're certain? I chose you last night. I'm choosing you now. I'll choose you 3 days from now. She stepped closer, emboldened by the bond singing between them. Unless you've changed your mind? He laughed, low and dangerous. Changed my mind? Calista, I've thought of nothing else since the moment you walked into those kennels. I've imagined marking you, claiming you properly, making sure every creature in this kingdom knows you're mine. Then why do you look so worried? Because once it's done, there's no going back. The bond becomes permanent. You'll feel everything I feel. I'll feel everything you feel. We'll be connected for the rest of our lives. His jaw tightened. I need you to be sure. Calista reached up and cupped his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. I've never been more sure of anything. Storm huffed his approval. Nyra wagged her tail. Rhydian pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. 3 days, he murmured. And then you'll be mine completely. I'm already yours, she corrected softly. Then in 3 days, the whole world will know it. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Marin helped Calista bathe in water infused with moonflower and sage, traditional herbs meant to purify and strengthen the bond. A seamstress arrived with fabric in deep midnight blue, the color of the royal house, and took measurements for the ceremonial gown. It's customary for the mate to wear the king's colors during the marking, Marin explained, pinning the fabric at Callista's waist. You'll be presented to the pack first, then the ceremony happens under the full moon. Callista's hands trembled slightly. Will the whole court watch? Only the inner circle. The wolves, the king's most trusted advisors, and any pack members who wish to witness. Marin's expression softened. It's sacred, child. Intimate. Not a spectacle. That helped, though nerves still fluttered in Callista's stomach. She saw less of Rhydian during those 2 days. He was managing court business, ensuring everything was prepared. But the bond kept them connected. She could feel him throughout the palace, a steady presence that anchored her when anxiety threatened to overwhelm. On the second night, she found him in the throne room after the court had emptied. He sat on the steps leading up to his throne, elbows on his knees, looking more tired than she'd ever seen him. Rhydian. His head snapped up, and the exhaustion vanished, replaced by something warm and fierce. You shouldn't be here. It's late. I couldn't sleep. She moved closer, the wolves padding silently behind her. I can feel you through the bond. You're worried. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. There are traditions, expectations. The court wants a grand ceremony, witnesses, formal vows. His eyes met hers. But what I want is to take you into the forest with just the wolves and claim you under the moon. No audience. No politics. Callista's heart swelled. Then let's do that. You deserve more than a secret ceremony in the woods. I deserve what makes me happy. She sat beside him on the steps, close enough that their shoulders touched. And what makes me happy is you. Not a performance for the court. Rhydian studied her for a long moment. You're certain? When will you stop asking me that? Never. His mouth quirked. I'll spend the next 3 centuries making sure you still want this. Good. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and his arm came around her immediately, pulling her close. Tell me about the ceremony. The real one, not the court version. We'll go to the sacred grove at moonrise. The wolves will form a circle around us. His voice dropped lower, intimate. I'll ask if you accept the bond. You'll answer. Then, he paused. Then I mark you. My bite here. His fingers traced the spot on her neck again, making her shiver. And the bond becomes permanent. What happens after? After, you're mine. And I'm yours. Forever. The word hung in the air between them. Forever. Not months or years, but centuries. A lifetime, his lifetime, stretched ahead of them. I'm not afraid anymore, Calista whispered. No. No. I was afraid of being unwanted, unloved, disposable. She pulled back to look at him. But you make me feel like I'm the only thing that matters in the world. You are. His hand cupped her face. The only thing that's ever mattered. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and felt the bond flare between them in response. When they broke apart, Rhydian rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow night. Just us and the wolves. Tomorrow night, she agreed. Storm howled softly, as if sealing the promise. The full moon rose silver and perfect over the sacred grove. Calista stood at the edge of the clearing, wearing the midnight blue gown that flowed like water around her body. Her hair hung loose down her back, unbraided for the first time since arriving at the palace. Marin had woven moonflowers through the strands, their white petals glowing in the darkness. The 6 wolves were already there, forming a perfect circle in the center of the grove. Their eyes reflected the moonlight, amber and gold and silver. And in the middle of them stood Rhydian. He'd shed his formal court attire for simple black clothing, his hair loose around his shoulders. When he saw her, something raw and hungry crossed his face. Calista. Her name was a prayer and a plea. She walked forward, her bare feet silent on the moss-covered ground. The wolves parted to let her through, their massive heads lowering in respect as she passed. When she reached Rhydian, he took both her hands in his. "The bond brought us together," he said, his voice carrying through the grove. "But tonight, you choose freely. Without obligation. Without fear." His eyes held hers, storm-gray and ancient. "Do you accept me as your mate? Do you accept this bond, knowing it will tie us together for the rest of my life?" Callista's heart thundered in her chest. This was it. The moment everything changed forever. "I accept you," she said clearly. "I accept the bond. I choose you, Rhydian Thorncrest. Not because fate decided it, but because my heart did." The wolves began to howl, a sound both wild and reverent that echoed through the forest. Rhydian's control shattered. He pulled her close, one hand sliding into her hair, tilting her head to expose her neck. "This will hurt for just a moment," he whispered against her skin. "Then you'll feel everything. All of it." "I trust you," she breathed. His lips brushed the spot where her neck met her shoulder, gentle, reverent. Then his teeth sank in. Pain bloomed sharp and bright, but it lasted only a heartbeat. Then it transformed into something else entirely. Pleasure so intense it stole her breath. The bond exploded between them, no longer a thread but a living, burning thing that fused them together. She could feel him. Not just his emotions but his very essence. 3 centuries of loneliness and patience and desperate hope finally fulfilled. His love for her, ancient and absolute, poured into her like molten gold. And he could feel her too. Every scar Lady Varys had left, every moment of kindness she'd clung to, every ounce of strength she'd hidden beneath years of forced meekness. He felt it all and loved her more fiercely for it. When he pulled back, his lips were stained with her blood. The mark on her neck burned and throbbed, already beginning to scar in the shape of his bite. "Mine," he growled, his eyes flashing pure silver. "Yours," she agreed, then reached up and pulled him down for a kiss that tasted of copper and moonlight and forever. The wolves howled their approval, the sound rising into the night sky. When they finally broke apart, Rhydian pressed his forehead to hers. "How do you feel?" "Complete," she whispered. "Like I've been missing half of myself my entire life and just found it." "That's exactly what you are." His thumb traced the fresh mark on her neck, and she shivered. "My other half. My mate. My queen." "Queen," she repeated softly. The word still felt foreign. "In 3 days, we'll make it official. A coronation before the court." He smiled at her expression. "Don't worry. That one will be much less intimate." Despite everything, Calista laughed. "I'm not ready to be a queen." "You've been ready since the moment you walked into those kennels and showed mercy to creatures that were meant to kill you." He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "You just didn't know it yet." Storm approached, pressing his massive head against Callista's hand. She could feel his approval through the bond now, not just Rhydian's bond, but a connection to the wolves themselves. "They really are mine now," she said in wonder. "Ours," Rhydian corrected. "Everything I have is yours." The coronation was nothing like the marking ceremony. Where the grove had been intimate and sacred, the throne room was grand and suffocating. Every noble in the kingdom had gathered, dressed in their finest silks and jewels. Banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, and the afternoon sun streamed through stained glass windows, painting everything in fractured light. Calista stood in the antechamber, trying to breathe. The gown they'd made for her was stunning. Midnight blue velvet with silver embroidery that caught the light like starlight. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate style, woven through with diamonds and moonstones. The mark on her neck was visible, proclaiming to everyone what she was: the Lycan King's mate. "You look like you might be sick," Marin observed, adjusting the gown's train. "I might be," Calista admitted. "Deep breaths, child. You've already done the hard part. This is just theater." The door opened, and Rhydian entered. He wore formal black with the royal crest embroidered in silver, every inch the ancient king. But when he saw her, his expression softened into something achingly tender. "Leave us," he said quietly to Marin. The older woman curtsied and slipped out, closing the door behind her. Rhydian crossed to Calista and took her trembling hands. "I can feel your fear through the bond. There are hundreds of people out there. Nobles who think I'm beneath you, who whisper that I'm not worthy. They're wrong." His voice was absolute. "And after today, they'll know it. What if I fail? What if I say the wrong thing or trip or—" He silenced her with a kiss, gentle and grounding. When he pulled back, his thumb traced her jawline. "You survived 19 years of cruelty. You walked into a kennel of death and showed kindness. You stood before Lady Varys and spoke your truth." His storm-gray eyes held hers. "You've already proven yourself 100 times over. This is just making it official." Calista drew a shaky breath. "I wish it was just us again. Like the Grove." "So do I. But our people need to see you. Need to know who you are." He smiled slightly. "Besides, the wolves will be there. If anyone dares disrespect you, Storm will remind them of their manners." Despite her nerves, she laughed. "That's not reassuring." "It should be." He offered his arm. "Ready?" "No." But she nodded anyway and placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. The doors swung open, and sound crashed over her, hundreds of voices falling silent as the king and his mate entered. Calista kept her chin up, her spine straight, even as every instinct screamed at her to make herself small. The crowd parted as they walked down the center aisle, and she felt the weight of every stare. The wolves were waiting at the base of the throne. Storm, Nyra, Varek, Ash, Thorn, and Rhyme. All 6 in formation, their presence both protective and declarative. When they reached the throne, Rhydian turned to face the assembled court. His voice rang out, commanding and clear. 3 centuries I have ruled this kingdom. 3 centuries I waited for my mate." His hand tightened on hers. "The wolves recognized her worth before any of us. They bowed to her when she had nothing. They protected her when she was defenseless. They chose her, as I have chosen her." He turned to Calista, and his next words were softer, meant for her alone though the entire court could hear. "Calista Briar, you are my mate, my bond, my equal. Before these witnesses, I name you Queen of the Lycan Kingdom." A servant approached with a crown on a velvet cushion, not the heavy, ornate thing Calista had feared, but a delicate circlet of silver shaped like thorns and wolves. Rhydian took it and placed it on her head himself. "All hail Queen Calista," he announced. The court hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then, one by one, they knelt. Hundreds of nobles, touching their foreheads to the marble floor in acknowledgement of their new queen. Calista looked out at them, these people who had whispered about her, doubted her, questioned her worth. Now they knelt before her. Not because she was born to nobility. Not because she was powerful or wealthy or trained. But because the wolves had chosen her. Because the king had claimed her. Because she had survived and somehow remained kind. Storm howled, and the other wolves joined him, a sound of triumph and acceptance that echoed through the throne room. Rhydian took her hand and raised it high. "Your queen," he said simply. And this time, when the court responded, their voices rang with genuine respect. "Long live the queen." 6 months later, Calista walked through the palace gardens with Storm at her side, reviewing the morning's correspondence. Trade agreements, requests for audience, a formal invitation to the Northern Territories. The stack of parchment in her hands no longer intimidated her. She'd learned. Not just court protocol or diplomatic language, but how to wield the quiet power that came with being queen. How to speak softly and be heard. How to show mercy without weakness. How to lead not through force, but through the same kindness that had won the wolves. Your Majesty. A courier approached and bowed. News from the southern province. Lady Varys' estate has been seized by the crown. The investigation into her late husband's death has concluded. Callista's hand stilled on the parchment. 6 months ago, the name would have sent ice through her veins. Now she felt only a distant, cold satisfaction. And arsenic poisoning, confirmed. She's been stripped of all titles and lands. Currently residing in a tenant house on the edge of her former estate, dependent on the charity of merchants she once considered beneath her. Not execution. Not imprisonment. Something far more devastating for a woman like Lady Varys: obscurity and dependence. A living reminder that cruelty had consequences. Thank you. That will be all. The courier bowed and departed. Calista stood for a moment, letting the information settle. Lady Varys was destroyed. Not dead, but powerless. Dependent on the kindness of others, the way she'd forced Calista to be. Justice, not revenge. You're smiling. Rhydian's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him approaching with Nyra trotting at his heels. 6 months of being mated hadn't diminished the pull she felt when she saw him. If anything, it had grown stronger. Lady Varys has lost everything, she said simply. He studied her face. How do you feel? Free. The word surprised her with its truth. I thought I'd feel vindicated or triumphant. But mostly I just feel free. She can't hurt me anymore. She can't hurt anyone anymore. Rhydian pulled her close, and she melted into his embrace, breathing in cedar and winter wind. The bond hummed contentedly between them. You've changed, he observed, pressing a kiss to her temple. So have you. She pulled back to look at him. You smile more. Laugh more. You gave me reason to. His thumb traced the mark on her neck, healed now into a silver scar that matched the color of his wolf form. 3 centuries of waiting, and you were worth every moment. Storm huffed impatiently, pushing between them. Yes, yes, we know you approve, Rhydian said, but his hand automatically went to scratch behind the wolf's ears. Calista laughed. The sound still felt new sometimes, genuine joy, freely given. She'd learned to laugh again in these months. To feel safe. To believe she deserved the love that surrounded her. The council wants to discuss expanding the orphanage, she said, changing the subject. I've been reviewing the proposals. Of course you have. His expression softened with pride. My queen, champion of the forgotten. She'd started the project 3 months ago, a home for orphan children, run by kind staff, where no child would be made to feel worthless or unwanted. Where no one would sleep in cellars or go hungry or believe they were less than human. Someone should have done it years ago, she said. Someone needed to survive what you survived first. To understand. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're turning your pain into protection for others. That's not just strength, Calista. That's grace. She looked around the gardens, at the palace she now called home, the wolves who followed her everywhere, the kingdom that had learned to love their unexpected queen. The girl sent to die in the kennels had walked out claimed. But more than that, she'd walked out transformed. Not because a king had chosen her, but because she'd chosen herself. Chosen to survive. Chosen to stay kind despite cruelty. Chosen to believe she deserved more than the scraps the world had offered. What are you thinking? Rhydian asked softly. Calista smiled up at him. That they sent me to be mauled in the wolf kennels. And instead, I found my pack. She gestured to the wolves sprawled around them, to Rhydian, to the palace behind them. I found my home. I found myself. Storm's howl rose into the afternoon air, triumphant and wild. The other wolves joined him, a song of acceptance, of belonging, of a queen who'd earned her crown not through birthright but through the strength of her gentle heart. Rhydian pulled her close and kissed her, deep and claiming, the bond flaring bright between them. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. They sent you to die, he murmured. But I lived, Calista finished. And I won. Not just survived. Thrived. The wolves howled their agreement, and in the palace gardens, under the warm sun, the queen who'd started with nothing stood surrounded by everything that mattered. Love. Safety. Purpose. Pack. She'd walked into the kennels invisible. She'd walked out unforgettable.